Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show how I stitch a lace panel. Now, it's a very textured panel. It's great for slow stitching projects, for either the background or the basis of another project. I'm going to use this as the cover of a journal or a book, and it's only the first step in creating that book. But the result is a beautiful panel that I can use in my work. Now, the lace itself is beautiful, and when combined with a bunch of different laces, it adds really interesting texture and dimension to your project. So here's how I go about creating that panel. So here's an example of the lace panel like we'll make today in the video. Now, this is just an assortment of laces. Some are cotton, some are like a rayon or a polyester. Some are white, some are tea-dyed, some are just beige. I stitched it onto a piece of muslin, and you can see all the different stitches I used here. And these have a border at the end, a little ruffle. Now this, my intention is to make this as a cover for either a journal or a little book. So it has some give and it's folding and flexible, but it's so textured and so beautiful. And this is the effect that I want to achieve. There's another way you can do this, and it's just slightly different. And here I put it on a piece of denim, and I still have all my lace pieces. There's still a lot of texture, but it's a different feel. The first one here is very feminine and light, mainly because the lace is lighter colors. The background is a neutral, but also with the edge here, it looks a little more masculine. I can also use this as a book cover, but for now, it's just a lace panel. And I just took advantage of all the different laces. I repeated some of them, and I added stitches. Now you can play around with how you want the stitches to appear, if you want them to sort of disappear into your work, or if you want them to really be noticeable and part of your lace panel, and that's up to you. So now to start with, the first thing I do is decide what size panel I want to create, and then from there I choose my lace. So here's the lace panel that I want to use today. It's about 6 inches tall, maybe 8 or 9 inches wide. And it's a very interesting piece. It's kind of a neutral. I can use whichever side I want, the right side or the wrong side. I didn't back this with a batting, although you could certainly do that. I just wanted that flexibility because I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to use this for. Now, I know I want my lace to go across. I could also have them go up and down. So to that end, I found a bunch of lace. Now, some of this lace I tea-dyed, so the actual lace itself can be a little mottled in color. It's not perfectly dyed. There's a little bit of staining because that's what tea-dyeing is, it's staining. And then there are some pieces here that are probably too small to use on this particular piece, but nevertheless, I have them here and I can decide. Now, if you wanted to use nothing but tea-dyed, you could do that. I have some white lace thrown in here because I like that contrast. And yet again, some of it's cotton, some of it's polyester, some of it's crocheted. So I have a different effect. So now that I have my supplies, I have my lace, and I have my panel that I'm going to put it on, the next step is to choose the thread that I'm going to use. And I'm just going to use this little pearl cotton. I want my stitches to kind of just dissolve and be hidden in the background. So from here, I start planning my design. I like to start with my largest pieces of lace, and I just set them down accordingly. And I can decide if I want them to hang over the edge or not. And I kind of like that look where they hang over the edge. It gives a ruffled border, and it's very pretty. I like to start with my largest pieces of lace, and sometimes the lace has different edging on both sides, so I really play around with that and see what I can come up with. Now, I like these two big pieces together. The question is, how far do I want that lace to show? I really like these rounded edges, so I think I'll just move that up. And it's very pretty. I can even put it on top of my existing lace. So there are quite a few decisions to be made here. But for now, I'll just do some design work. And I don't have to use all these pieces of lace either. Since I only have a couple of the white lace, I can see exactly how I want that to go. I want them to be a little bit distance apart. I can even take this one out for now and just play around with what I have. So this part of the design process takes time. That's why I'm speeding it along, just so you can see all the stops and starts that I do when I come up with my design. Because lace is transparent in some areas, the bottom piece shows through, and I like that effect. I like the way you see the different layers here. So for now, I'm going to go with this panel, just the way this is. The next step for me is to pin down the pieces that I want to stitch first. And I don't like to stitch all of them at once. So I know this is going to be my top piece, so I'll just set this aside. I'm really happy with the way this one looks, my major white piece. So I'm just going to take a couple of pins and stick that into place. And I also know I really like this setup beneath it. So I'm very carefully just going to pull out my bottom fabric, leaving all these pieces in the formation that I like, and set them aside. So now I have my white panel up top, which I like. I can see that it's a little crooked now that I've removed my other pieces, so I'll just modify it ever so slightly. It's a very forgiving technique. And even if I did stitch it down a little wonky, that's okay. So I have my lace here. So I have my very sharp and thin needle here with the pearl cotton threaded through it. And now all I want to do is come in and just tack it down. So I'm going to come right to the edge of this lace panel and just overlap all my stitches. I use what I have here for this lace, so I'm just going to wrap my stitches right around this opening and thread it right down. And I'll speed this along. I'm just tacking the stitches down because I want to hold it in place so that I can remove those pins. Now I could have used white thread if I wanted, but I just want to use a couple of threads. So I have a kind of a champagne colored beige, which tends to match the tea-dyed lace, and I have this lighter beige, which will work with these white threads, and it'll be totally hidden with the beige lace, the tea-dyed lace. So now I just want to create enough stitches to hold it down securely, not adding a lot of bulk, but I want to make sure that this white lace piece is not going anywhere. I could stitch every single hole if I wanted. I'm just doing every other one. I think it gives me a nice, secure piece. I can always go back in and add more stitches if I want, but once I have my piece secured and tacked down, then I can start really playing around with my panel, which is the part I love the most. Now I buy a lot of my lace on the roll. I find a lot at thrift stores, and I buy from Etsy online. I prefer the look of the cotton lace, but the trouble with the cotton lace, the crocheted lace, is that it's a little bulkier than the polyester or nylon lace. So while I really like the feel of the cotton lace, sometimes it's very beneficial for me in my projects to use that artificial fabric lace, the polyester or the rayon. So I'll just continue stitching right to the end of my fabric piece here. When I get to the end, I'll just knot off the back, remove the pins, and then I like to trim off the end of that lace. And I don't trim it right up against the fabric. I give it a little bit of space. And I save these little scraps, if they're large enough, to use for fabric collage. So these in particular are nicely sized, so I'll save those. So I have my first piece tacked down. I know the next piece that I have was going to go right up against that first piece. So again, I'll tack my lace down just with a couple of pins, and then I'll add my stitches. And now I can take my darker thread, and I can just stitch that down, and I'll start at one end, and I'll just use a little running stitch and stitch the length of this piece. I keep my stitches fairly good size. They don't have to be small or invisible, but if that's something that you want, is to have tiny stitches, by all means, create those tiny stitches. I like to have kind of a stitch that just is large enough to tack it down securely, easy enough to see, and where I only have to make a couple of dozen stitches on this row. Because then I'm going to come down the other side of the row to really secure it and hold it in place. So a lot of what this panel is just design and building up the different layers of lace to really see what peeks through your various layers. It's an unusual effect, and it's a fun use of lace. You can even do a running stitch. And then I like to flatten it out. So I'll tack down on this side. And some of my stitches are bigger than others, but I know that this layer gets really hidden under the layers of lace on top of it. So my goal is just to secure it down. And then I'll knot the thread and trim the edges of the lace just to match that first layer that we cut. Again, I'll save this little scrap. So now I want to go back to my design process. So I can see what I have for my remaining pieces of lace. And now I think I'm just going to tack them all down on this side. Use a good number of pins to really hold that in place. And this is the type of project where preparation is really key for getting a nice result. So spend that time to really secure your pieces of lace where you want them. And if it didn't work out, that that's where you wanted it, don't hesitate to remove that pin and repin it so that you get the result that you want. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's nice to create what you envisioned in the first place. So now I'm going to take my piece and going in the direction of the pins so I don't get poked, or at least so I get poked less. I'll start right at the top here. And I'm just going to come down and tack these pieces together right on the edge. And then instead of going down, which I can always go the length of my piece, I'm going to slowly move over to the other side, going right across with a little line of stitches. So I come up from behind, make another stitch, and again, a lot of this is done by feel. So I hold my lace in place and continue to do my stitches. I like to hold my lace panel with my thumb so I can hold a few of the laces in place, and just make that stitching across. And it's a little precarious at first, but once you have this first row really anchored well, it's a lot easier. So I make my stitches going down to really secure it into place. And I kind of jump around depending on the lace that I'm anchoring. And once I have that first column anchored, I'll come in here with my scissors and just trim off the edge. That makes it a little neater to work with. So now I'll just continue up and down, anchoring it into place. So now I'll complete that last stitch, knot it off, trim it, and then trim this edge. Again, I just set my scraps aside, and I have the layers starting to really show up the way I like. I want to add that final piece up top here. I think I like that scalloped edge right on the side here, and I like it covering this piece as well. That adds a lot of interest. So I'll tack that down. Again, just using a few pins. And then using my knotted thread, I'll stitch that in place. Again, I'll start up top here. I'll secure it to one end, stitch the length, and then I'll stitch that scalloped edge to hold it in place. And again, I'll just use a running stitch. Maybe make those stitches a little bit smaller. So I make a little stitch, pull my needle up. I like to pull my fabric and then I flatten it out. And I'll continue this the length of my piece. I'm going to remove that pin. One less pin likely to stab me. I don't want to pull my stitches too tight because then my lace panel will start to ruffle. But if I do pull it too snug, I can just stretch it out and loosen up the tension. So this is very good practice for that as well. It's something I tend to struggle with. When I get to the end of this panel, I'll remove that final pin, make sure my thread's out of the way, and trim that edge. So now I'll come down with my lace, making small little stitches until I get to that scalloped edge. I'll clip my thread, trim my lace. Now I have my completed panel. It's nice and soft and flexible, and it would make a lovely journal cover. Now, I'll show another video at some point in the future of how I transform this into a journal cover. It involves another backing piece of fabric, but I always like to start with more than I think I'll need. Now from here, I'll decide if I want to add stitches to really be seen on top of the lace, or I want to tack it down further. I'm quite happy with the way it looks, but with all these little holes, this would be a lovely area to stitch in. So this is the lace panel made with the tea stain lace and the white lace. And I showed earlier some more tea stained panel on denim and another piece on muslin. So that's how I create my panel. Now, depending on the lace that you use, the texture, and how often you repeat that same lace in your pattern, you'll get a completely different effect. You can get something very delicate and feminine, or something very structured and rigid. I hope you found this video helpful. In the future, I'll do another one of how I use this panel as the cover for my journal. But for now, you have the panel that you can work with. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me.